Hi guys, so today I'm going to show you how to make the Martine jumpsuit. Now the Martine is my Franken pattern of the Marigold jumpsuit and the Bettine dress, both from Tilly and the buttons. I use the Marigold trousers and a hat of the Bettine bodice in order to make this wrap front jumpsuit. I actually made that for my sister last year and had such a good response. I know a lot of people are planning to make their own, that I thought I'd whip together a quick tutorial on how to do that. So I'm making the tutorial in two parts. The first part will be just showing you how to adapt the bodice into that wrap front, and also how to adjust that to meet and fit the trousers. It's just a few adjustments, it shouldn't be too difficult to follow. Hopefully you'll understand what I'm trying to show you in the video. Alright, let's get going. So this is the Bettine and the Marigold, which we're going to marry together to make the Martine jumpsuit. So that is the top half of the Bettine here and the bottom half of the Marigold jumpsuit. So the first I'm going to show you how to do is how to hack this top into the jumpsuit that I made. So the first thing that we're going to do is actually trace out the front bodice of the Bettine, okay, and we're going to trace that out onto a piece of paper that's on the fold, and the fold line is going to be where it says place on the fold here, so as if you're cutting that out on a piece of fabric. And so that's when you open it up, you're going to have one whole bodice piece for the front there. I've already drawn one out, which is quite a big piece of paper, but you get the general idea from there. Can't quite get everything in here, but you'll get the idea from there. So that you can see is the Bettine top there. I'm going to show you how that's going to change into the wrap pack version. Okay, so the first thing that we need to do is trim off a little bit of the bottom here, okay, and that is because the Bettine bodice includes extra length for the elastic casing. So that means that there's an extra, I think it's a 2.5 centimeter allowance for it to be turned under and for the elastic to go in there. So I'm gonna just rule off 2.5 centimeters here. Of course, you should also do any adjustments you make to the Bettine for yourself anyway. So I often take off a little bit extra length on the bottom there, if I want to not have so much extra fabric at the bottom, but everyone should do what they normally would want to do there anyway. Then what we're going to do is just roughly cut out. I'm going to cut out the excess on the top of my piece of paper here, just to make it a bit easier to work with. Alright, so what our next step is to do is to change this bottom bit of the bodice to make sure that that matches up to the same width as the Martine bodice. We're going to make sure that that measures up to the same width as the Marigold bodice, because that's how we know that that is going to fit against the waistband and the trousers of the Marigold. Alright, so I've got my Marigold bodice piece out here already. Now unfortunately, the Marigold and the Bettine are facing opposite directions, so you're going to have to work with one piece in reverse for this. So one way to do that is to trace out this and to then work with it on the reverse, so it's the same side as your Bettine, or you can just flip your Bettine over to the other side and I'll put mine on the single sheet so it's a little easier to see. And you can just faintly see the outline of my Bettine bodice there. What we'll do to match up the centre front and the base here, so that's the same centre front and the same waistband measurement on each. Measure up the centre line. My centre line's roughly here. I'm going to widen and trace out basically over where the Marigold bodice is here. So I'm using the size one just as a guide for you, so I'm just going to quickly trace that off for us. And just blend that into the bottom there. Add the notch in at the bottom because the waistband will have those notches in there. Okay. So I'm going to move that out of the way first. And now you'll be able to see that I've got a few different lines on the bottom here. So this was the original bottom of the Bettine, which we are going to ignore. That's our new length here. And you can see where we're now going to curve it up and widen that point. And I'll use my pattern master to do that, just to make sure that's nice and smooth, but doing it freehand is also absolutely fine. There are no hard and fast rules with this. And I'm going to carry that line up all the way here. Now obviously you've got this rather ugly line up here now, and what you need to do is just curve that around. Again, no hard and fast rules with how you want to do that, but you want to make sure that that's just a nice pleasant looking curve there. Alright, so now we're going to just ignore this line. We're ignoring this line at the bottom, and this line at the bottom as well. And with your pattern piece cut on folded in half, like so, we're now going to cut along this line up here. Leave the neckline for the moment, so don't cut this line up here, you just want to cut this line. So this is your basic kind of pattern done now. So you can see all of that on there too. And what we want to do now is create the V-neck that goes across there. And the way to do that is by marking on basically how much of a crossover you want your wrap to have there. By default, I recommend using 12 centimeters. You may want to make that wider or narrower as you see fit. I find that 12 centimeters tends to work quite well as a general rule. So I'll mark on here where the 12 centimeter line is. And now we're going to mark a line from the top where the shoulder is here, all the way down to your 12 centimeter mark right here at the bottom down there. Ideally a longer ruler is better for this, but I'm just going to do a rough line all the way across. Doesn't need to be so precise, but as long as you have a straightish line going across that's close to that mark. What you need to do now, so this is including your seam allowance because you've kept it from the seam allowance mark up at the top here. So you'll cut this line here and your fold, once your finished neckline will be 1.5 centimeters in all the way across. So make sure that that's not too high or too low, depending on what you prefer, because this runs directly through the neckline of the regular Bettine. The depth of this neckline will be quite similar to the dress, just perhaps very slightly lower, as V-necks and wraps often are, but it shouldn't be too dissimilar. So we'll now cut that line all the way across. Don't cut this wonky. Take your time. And this, I'll show it this way around. This is your new pattern piece, which so you can now see the shape of that. Got the same t-shirt arm, widened out a little bit to where the kind of marigold width is. And this big diagonal that's going to go over where the centre front is. So I'm going to mark on here for you. So this is the centre front here. What I like to do down here is mark on the 1.5 centimetre point, which is here. And then fold this along that centre front again and mark on where that mark is here. And that way, when you cut this out, you make this into a notch, and you'll know that your opposite wrap will end up at this point as well, which is quite a good way to make sure that everything's matching up. So notch here and notch here, and that's the centre front piece done. But what you'll now need to do is create the facing for that, which essentially is a long strip. You want to create the facing the same depth as the back facing, because you can use the same back facing of the Bettine anyway, and just create the new front facing. So you want to measure the depth of the back facing. So if you measure the depth of the back facing, which I've got here, so we're using the size 1 just as a sample here, and that is 5.5 centimeters. And basically just measure 5.5 centimeters down all the way along. Again, a longer ruler is probably just the easier way to do this, but I'll stick with my pattern master for the moment. Wobbly lines, and then you just trace that out, trace over this, so you have a separate piece that is this shape, and this part here, this shoulder seam, will attach. This shoulder seam here will attach to the back facing piece that comes in the Bettine pattern. The back bodice is done in much the same way. So again, I've got the marigold bodice here, and I really cut out one of my back patina, pre-prepared this one. So you don't need to cut this back piece on the fold, that's just a single layer, just right here. And again, you want to just take off the bottom edge. So take off the same 2.5 centimeters on the bottom. And then you're going to flip this over and measure that up to the bottom here. This is actually a different one that I've sized. I prepared for someone else, managed to get those mixed up. And And what this was a size 5 actually, so you can see it's matched right up here, and I've extended this bodice so that it hits this line here. You can see it's not following up along according to the marigold line here, but it's just enough to blend in to the side seam of the Bettine. So you can see I've added on basically a triangle of space on the bottom there, which makes that again match up to the waistband of the marigold. Otherwise you're going to have lots of pieces that don't fit together. So you're going to be ending up with 4 pattern pieces. The back with the adjusted side, the back facing, which you'll copy straight from the Bettine pattern, and you'll have the new front piece here, and you'll have the new facing piece for that as well. And that is it. You can add on the extra cuff for the Bettine as well if you wanted to. So the Bettine, you do have the option of an extra piece on the side there if you wanted to add a little bit of extra design in there. I tend to forego it personally. But that's all you need to do for the bodice. Now remember, the trousers of the marigold are exactly the same, so you don't need to make any alterations to those. You're going to copy out the marigold trousers exactly as you normally would do for your size, and do any changes or alterations that you would normally make as well, so lengthening or shortening or any of that jazz. So stay tuned for part 2, where I'm going to show you how to sew up that new bodice.